They called me sterile in front of a packed courtroom, not infertile, not unable to conceive, just sterile like a machine that failed to start. The word echoed against the marble walls, and for a second, even the reporters stopped typing. I'm Summer, 32, and this is how my millionaire husband tried to erase me with one sentence. Christian sat there in his $1,000 suit, pretending to be the devastated husband whose dream of fatherhood had been crushed by his defective wife. His lawyer waved documents like scripture, claiming my infertility had violated our prenuptial agreement. The judge looked sympathetic. The gallery whispered. And me? I reached into my purse and smiled. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, stay until the end. You'll want to see what happened next. Let's rewind 3 years to the moment I met the man who would turn my life into a headline. I was working as an events coordinator at a boutique hotel in Manhattan when Christian Morrison walked in like something out of a magazine cover. 6'2", salt and pepper hair, and blue eyes that knew how to linger just long enough. He was planning his company's annual gala, and lucky me got assigned to make his every wish come true. I need this to be perfect, he said during our first meeting. Money is no object. Famous last words. Back then, I was dazzled. He sent flowers to my tiny apartment every day for a week, took me to restaurants where the waiters knew his name, and proposed on a penthouse balcony overlooking Central Park, with a ring that could have funded a small country. The wedding was straight out of a dream designer gown, celebrity planner, guest list full of Forbes faces. His mother, Elena, flew in wearing enough diamonds to light the aisle. His business partner, Marcus, gave a touching toast that made people tear up. I felt like Cinderella stepping into forever. But fairy tales don't warn you what happens when the clock strikes midnight and your prince turns out to be a stranger. The first red flag came during our honeymoon in Tuscany. We were sitting on the terrace of a sunlit villa, everything perfect. Christian, I said, maybe we could start a family when we get back. His espresso cup froze halfway to his lips. That's wonderful, darling, but let's not rush. Reasonable, right? Except enjoying marriage apparently meant Christian working 16-hour days while I played decorator and hostess in our penthouse. Every time I mentioned children, he had another excuse. The company was expanding, the market unstable. Maybe next year, maybe after Paris or Tokyo, maybe never. On social media, he was still the perfect husband. He'd post photos of us at sunset with captions like "my beautiful wife." His followers flooded the comments with heart emojis and questions about when we'd have kids. If only they knew. Behind closed doors, our bedroom felt more like a museum. Beautiful, quiet, untouched. When I tried to bridge the distance, he'd suddenly remember an urgent email that couldn't wait. I kept telling myself that successful men were just busy, that real love took patience. But at night, staring at the ceiling while he slept with his back turned, I knew something was deeply wrong. My friend Rachel, a nurse who'd known me since college, was the first to say what I was too scared to admit. "You look exhausted," she told me over brunch. "When's the last time you and Christian had a real conversation?" I tried to defend him, but my voice betrayed me. Christian could talk for hours without saying anything real. He'd mastered the art of conversation without connection. And I kept pretending it was fine. Our second anniversary broke the illusion. I'd spent days planning the perfect evening, his favorite restaurant, the same wine from our wedding night, a dress that made me feel like the woman he used to adore. He came home 3 hours late. "Marcus and I were reviewing projections," he said casually, loosening his tie. "You know how time flies." I stood there holding a bottle of wine, watching hope die quietly in my chest. "Christian, it's our anniversary." He blinked, then smiled that polite, empty smile. "Of course it is. Let's order takeout from that Thai place you like." "Takeout for our anniversary." I laughed because it was either that or cry. While he showered, claiming he needed to wash off the stress of his day, I picked up his phone. I knew it was wrong, but I was drowning in silence and needed a reason to stay afloat. The messages were boringly clean work emails, scheduling notes, nothing incriminating, no secret affair, no mysterious woman. His digital life was as sterile as our marriage. How fitting. But something about his chats with Marcus felt too easy inside jokes. Warmth, a kind of familiarity that didn't belong in spreadsheets. I told myself I was imagining things. That Marcus was just his closest friend. That I was the problem for feeling jealous. But deep down, I knew the distance between us wasn't an accident, it was engineered. And one day, I'd find out just how perfectly calculated it really was. 3 years later, Christian Morrison would call me sterile in front of a judge and a room full of strangers. What he didn't know was that I'd already found the truth, and it was locked inside a manila envelope that would end his empire. 3 years earlier, my story looked like every woman's dream. I was 29, living in a small studio apartment that smelled like takeout and ambition, working long hours as an event coordinator in a Manhattan boutique hotel. My life was ordinary until the day Christian Morrison walked through the glass doors and turned ordinary into cinematic. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd never had to wait in line for anything. The staff whispered his name as though it meant something bigger than money. Morrison Investments, rumored millions, the kind of success that made people sit up straighter when he entered a room. He was there to plan his company's annual gala, and I was assigned to handle it. "I need this to be flawless," he said during our first meeting, leaning forward just enough to make me feel chosen. "Money is no object." I remember smiling too much, pretending my heart wasn't racing at the way he looked at me, like I was part of the solution to his empire. Within days, he knew my favorite coffee order. Within a week, flowers started arriving at my front desk, white lilies, then roses, then an arrangement so large my coworkers called it the apology bouquet, even though he had nothing to apologize for. It's funny how quickly attention can start to feel like destiny. Christian invited me to dinner to talk logistics. The restaurant was one of those places without prices on the menu, where the waiters addressed him by name. I thought he must come there often. Later I'd realize it was one of a dozen spots where he kept a reservation on standby, ready for whoever needed impressing. But that night, when the wine flowed and he asked about my dreams, I forgot everything, except how effortlessly he made the world bend around him. 3 months later, he proposed on his penthouse balcony overlooking Central Park. The ring glittered like it belonged to another life, one where rent and bills didn't exist. I said yes before he finished the question. He slid the diamond on my finger, kissed me, and whispered, "We'll build a life people envy." He kept that promise. The wedding was a magazine spread waiting to happen. Designer gown, celebrity planner, guest list filled with CEOs and their camera-ready spouses. His mother, Elena, arrived from California wearing an ocean of jewels and an expression that said she approved of me because she approved of her son's taste. The speeches were all the same about Christian's brilliance, his generosity, his drive. But it was Marcus, his business partner, who gave the toast that made the crowd fall silent. "To Christian," he said, raising his glass, "and to the kind of love that makes all our hard work worth it." When they hugged afterward, something about it lingered. I told myself I was imagining things. The reception was endless champagne and flash photography. Everyone wanted to congratulate me. "You're so lucky," they said. "He's such a catch." I smiled until my cheeks hurt, because what else do you do when you believe you've won? I looked at Christian, perfect posture, perfect smile, and thought, this is what stability looks like. The honeymoon in Tuscany was even more beautiful. A villa carved into the hillside, views that looked painted. I'd never seen anything so breathtaking, not even on the postcards in the hotel gift shop where I used to work double shifts. We spent mornings on the terrace, afternoons exploring vineyards, and evenings making plans for the future, or rather, I did. "I can't wait to start a family," I told him one morning, sunlight spilling across the table. He froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled. "That's wonderful, darling. Let's not rush. Let's enjoy being married first." It sounded reasonable. It even sounded kind. But something about the way he said it stayed with me. There was relief in his tone, not patience, and that tiny flicker of hesitation. I ignored it. Because who questions happiness when it finally arrives? Back in New York, Christian's work life swallowed ours whole. He was up before dawn, home long after midnight, and when he was home, his mind was still elsewhere. Whenever I brought up children, he had another reason to delay: an expansion, an unstable market, a new deal. "Soon," he'd say, "I promise." Then he'd kiss my forehead, pick up his briefcase, and vanish again. Our life looked perfect from the outside. People stopped us at charity galas to ask how we met. Social media loved us. Christian posted anniversary tributes, tagged me in photos with captions like "Lucky Man." I didn't know it then, but those posts were armor. Every like and comment was another layer of protection around the illusion we'd built together. Privately, things were different. The penthouse was stunning but cold, all marble and glass and silence. I filled it with color, with candles and plants, anything that made it feel alive. Christian said he appreciated it, though he never looked up from his laptop when he did. We hosted dinner parties for his investors, and every time Marcus walked in, Christian's mood lifted. He'd laugh more, drink more, become someone warmer. I thought it was just friendship, the kind that comes from building something together. I tried to believe that love was supposed to look calm, mature, respectable, that the dizzy pulse of early passion naturally fades. But at night, lying beside a man who never reached for me, calm started to feel like a cage. Rachel saw it before I did. "You're fading," she said one afternoon, handing me coffee instead of sympathy. "You talk about him like he's a job you can't quit." I laughed it off, told her she was being dramatic. Yet even as I said it, I knew she was right. I'd stopped being a person in that marriage. I'd become a prop in Christian's perfectly curated life. It wasn't until our second anniversary that the mask slipped completely. I'd planned everything, reservations at the same restaurant where we'd celebrated our engagement, the same wine, the same perfume he used to say drove him crazy. He came home 3 hours late, smelling of cologne that wasn't his. "Marcus and I were going over numbers," he said, loosening his tie. Time got away from me. I reminded him what day it was. He smiled, that shallow smile that used to charm me. "Of course. Let's order takeout. Pad Thai?" That was the moment something inside me went quiet. While he showered, I picked up his phone. No affair, no secret mistress, just endless messages with Marcus, late-night texts, private jokes, a closeness that felt different. I didn't know what it meant yet. But I knew the distance between us wasn't an accident. It was designed. 3 years later, that design would unravel in the same courtroom where Christian tried to destroy me, because the man who called me sterile had made sure of that himself long before he ever met me. If you asked anyone back then, they'd have said we were living the dream. Christian and I had just returned from the honeymoon most people only see on glossy travel ads. Tuscany in June sunlight spilling across the vineyards, lazy afternoons by the pool, dinners under lanterns strung between olive trees. On Instagram, it looked perfect. Every photo was carefully framed, his arm around my waist, his smile reflected in my sunglasses, captions about new beginnings and forever. And for a while I believed it. The villa staff called me Signora Morrison, and the sound of that name made me glow. We spent our mornings drinking espresso on the terrace, watching the mist lift off the valley. I remember the smell of the air grapes and rosemary, something wild and alive. I thought it meant our marriage was alive too. So one morning I asked him quietly, almost shyly, maybe when we get back we could start thinking about a family. He froze mid-sip. It wasn't dramatic, just half a second, but long enough for me to feel the pause. Then he smiled, polished and composed. "That's wonderful, darling. But let's not rush. Let's enjoy being married first." It sounded perfectly reasonable. I smiled back, convincing myself it was love speaking, not hesitation. When we came home, I expected that not rushing would mean a few months, but weeks became seasons. Christian threw himself into work with the intensity of a man running from something. He was up before sunrise, often asleep on the couch before I even made it to bed. The company was expanding, he said. The market was volatile. There was always another deal, another client, another city that demanded him more than I did. When he was home, he wasn't really there. He'd kiss me on the forehead while scrolling through his phone, nod absently while I talked about my day. Our conversations were like polite business meetings, efficient, empty, transactional. I started counting the number of times he actually looked at me when we spoke. Some days, the number was 0. And yet, every time we traveled, everything changed. Paris, Kyoto, Dubai. On those trips, he became the man I'd fallen in love with again. Attentive, charming, magnetic. We'd walk hand in hand through crowded markets. He'd laugh easily, kiss me spontaneously, take photos that made us look like the couple everyone envied. The transformation was dizzying. The moment we landed back in New York, it vanished. People online called us goals. They saw the luxury, not the loneliness. I'd post a photo of us clinking champagne glasses and get comments like, "You two are perfect." I used to reply, "Thank you." Eventually I stopped replying at all. Our penthouse was breathtaking floor-to-ceiling windows, a skyline view, everything curated to perfection. But no matter how many candles I lit or how many dinner parties I hosted, it never felt like home. It felt like a showroom, built to impress guests, but not to be lived in. I'd sit on the velvet couch at night, the city glowing beneath us, and think about how silence can make even luxury sound hollow. Rachel, my best friend, noticed before anyone else. "You look tired," she said one afternoon as we met for brunch. "Like you're trying to smile through a migraine." I laughed it off, told her Christian was just busy, that success takes sacrifice. She leaned across the table, eyes sharp. "Summer, when's the last time you two actually talked? Like really talked?" I didn't answer, because deep down I couldn't remember. That night, I tried again. I made his favorite dinner, opened a bottle of red, waited for him to come home. He arrived after 10, loosened his tie, and muttered something about projections and expansion. I watched him eat, watched the way his eyes never left the screen of his tablet. "Christian," I said softly, "are you happy?" He glanced up, confused. "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be?" I nodded, pretending that answer was enough. But inside, something cracked. By our second anniversary, that crack had widened into a canyon. I'd spent the entire day preparing candles, dinner reservations, a dress that made me feel like the woman he used to see. He came home 3 hours late. "Marcus and I were reviewing numbers," he said casually, dropping his jacket on a chair. I stared at him, heart sinking. "Christian, it's our anniversary." He blinked, smiled faintly. "Of course, let's order takeout." "Takeout? On our anniversary?" The words landed like a punch. I smiled to keep from shaking. "Sure," I said. "Why not?" While he showered, claiming he needed to wash away the stress, I picked up his phone. I knew it was wrong, but I needed answers, needed something real. The messages were sterile work updates, meetings, jokes about markets. Nothing romantic, no secret mistress, no affair, but something about the messages between him and Marcus felt different. Too easy. Too close. Inside jokes. Unfinished sentences that the other clearly understood. A kind of intimacy that didn't need explanation. When Christian came out of the shower, I put his phone down and smiled. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," I said. But it wasn't perfect. It hadn't been for a long time. That night, lying beside him, I realized something that scared me more than loneliness. I didn't know the man sleeping next to me. And worse, I wasn't sure he ever really knew me either. 3 years later, that same man would stand in a courtroom, call me sterile, and watch his empire crumble because of one secret he'd buried before we ever met. From the outside, our marriage still looked like success. People saw the penthouse view, the luxury dinners, the posts about our power couple life. They didn't see the silence that filled the spaces between those photographs. Our life became a brand carefully staged, immaculately edited, soulless. Christian had mastered the art of presentation, and I had become the set piece that made it all look believable. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of him leaving. No kiss, no goodbye, just the quiet click of the door and the fading scent of cologne. I'd spend my days arranging charity dinners for his associates, choosing tableware that matched the flowers, rehearsing my smile for guests who wanted to believe in the fantasy we'd built. "You're glowing," they'd say at events, mistaking exhaustion for elegance. I'd laugh politely and refill their glasses. Whenever I tried to talk about children again, he'd change the subject with practiced ease. "Let's take that trip to Tokyo first," or "the market's too unstable right now." Every excuse sounded logical, even kind, until you realized how deliberately they avoided the truth. Slowly, the topic became taboo, an invisible boundary between us that I learned not to cross. Christian treated me like fine furniture, something expensive, something admired, something never touched. When we did appear together in public, his hand on my back was light, almost rehearsed. He called me darling in front of cameras, but in private I was just a shadow moving through his curated life. I filled the emptiness by perfecting the image. I redecorated the penthouse twice in 1 year, volunteered for causes I barely had time for, threw dinner parties that left me numb by dessert. Each photo we posted was another coat of paint on a cracking wall. His followers called me number goals. I called it survival. Rachel, my one remaining friend outside his circle, was the only person who didn't buy the illusion. "You look like a mannequin," she said one morning over brunch. "When's the last time you felt something?" I wanted to tell her I still did, that there were moments when Christian brushed my arm or laughed unexpectedly, and I thought maybe the man I'd married still existed. But even as I thought it, I knew those moments were choreography, not connection. Christian's mother, Elena, didn't help. She'd call and say things like, "Give him time, dear. Men like Christian are visionaries. They need space to create." Space. That word became our marriage. We had too much of it. Everywhere. In bed, we slept like strangers. In conversation, we floated past each other like polite ghosts. And every time I tried to close the distance, he retreated behind work, fitness, meetings, anything that made him too busy to feel. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't scream. It whispers. It tells you to keep smiling, because breaking down would ruin the picture. I started believing that maybe this was what marriage looked like for powerful people. That intimacy was a luxury they couldn't afford. That love had to fit into a schedule. But deep down, I knew better. It was during one of Christian's endless business trips that I realized how empty our home truly was. I wandered through our rooms, and noticed how little of me existed there. Everything was his taste. Minimalist art, neutral tones, sharp lines. I hadn't even chosen our dishes. I sat in the living room, surrounded by glass and marble, and felt like a guest in my own life. When he returned, he brought gifts, designer scarves, handbags, tokens of appreciation for my understanding. It was his way of apologizing without admitting guilt. I thanked him, smiled, and tucked them away in the closet with all the others, objects of affection without affection itself. One evening, as I was preparing for another of his corporate dinners, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, the kind of woman magazines called polished. But my eyes looked tired, like someone who'd learned to live inside a role. That night, while guests praised Christian's success and Marcus made another toast about vision and partnership, I watched the two of them laugh together, completely at ease. Christian's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. I felt invisible. After everyone left, I asked him, "Do you even see me anymore?" He frowned. "Don't start this again, Summer. You know how much pressure I'm under." I wanted to shout that pressure wasn't an excuse for indifference, but instead I whispered, "I miss you." He didn't answer. He just turned away and said, "We'll talk later." We never did. From that night, something in me shifted. I began to watch, to listen. Every time Marcus called, Christian's tone softened. Every time they met, his mood changed. I started to see patterns where before I'd only seen coincidences. I didn't know it yet, but the truth was already sitting in our house, locked behind a steel safe in his office, waiting for the day I'd finally open it. Our second anniversary was supposed to be the night I rescued us. I had planned everything down to the smallest detail: the restaurant where we'd had our engagement dinner, the same wine we drank on our wedding night, the same perfume he once said reminded him of the first time I knew I loved you. I spent hours getting ready, every curl, every line of eyeliner perfect, hoping he'd see me and remember who we used to be. He didn't come home. Note at 7, note at 8, note even at 9. By the time the clock hit 10, I was sitting on the couch in a dress that suddenly felt too tight, watching the candles burn down like little countdowns to disappointment. When the door finally opened, I already knew what he'd say. "Sorry, darling," he said, not looking up as he dropped his briefcase by the door. Marcus and I were reviewing projections. You know how time gets away. "Christian," I said quietly, "it's our anniversary." He froze for half a heartbeat, then smiled, the kind of smile that could sell sincerity to anyone who didn't live with him. "Of course it is. How thoughtless of me. Let's order takeout." Takeout. On the night I'd spent days preparing to save us. I stared at him, makeup perfect, heartbreaking quietly, and realized he didn't even see me anymore. While he showered, claiming he needed to wash off the stress of the day, I picked up his phone. I told myself it was just curiosity, not desperation. I was wrong. I needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that the distance between us had a reason. The messages were clean, too clean. Business meetings, reminders, calendar notes, no secret affair, no other woman, just empty politeness. I almost felt foolish, until I noticed the way he texted Marcus. It wasn't what they said, it was how they said it. The inside jokes, the shorthand, the warmth. It was the ease I used to have with him, the kind of connection that didn't need explanation. I scrolled further, and each line made me feel more like an outsider in my own marriage. When he came out of the shower, towel around his waist, he smiled and said, "Everything okay?" I put the phone down and nodded. Perfect. The word felt like poison on my tongue. That night, lying beside him, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the last 2 years, about the way his life ran like a machine that didn't have room for me, about how every time I tried to touch him, he flinched not visibly, but enough for me to feel it. I thought about Marcus's laugh, the way Christian's eyes softened when he talked about him. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe the problem wasn't that I couldn't give him what he wanted, but that he already had it. The next morning, he left before sunrise. He kissed the top of my head like an apology he didn't mean and said, "Don't wait up, long day." I watched him go, and something inside me shut off. For weeks afterward, I tried to convince myself it was stress, that I was imagining things, that every strange look, every hushed call, every canceled dinner wasn't part of something bigger. But denial has an expiration date, and mine came one cold evening in November when Christian announced casually, "Marcus is joining us for Thanksgiving." He said it like an order, not a question. "Of course he is," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. "Would it even be a holiday without Marcus?" Christian glanced at me, eyes hard. "He's family, Summer. He doesn't have anywhere else to go." Family. The word hit me wrong. Marcus had parents in Connecticut and a sister in Boston. He had plenty of places to go, yet somehow he always ended up in our home. At first I told myself it was kindness. Then I realized it was ritual. That Thanksgiving, as I served dinner, I watched them. The way Christian's whole posture changed when Marcus entered the room, his laughter louder, his smile easier, his attention fixed entirely on him. When Marcus complimented the meal, Christian beamed like he had cooked it. They shared quiet jokes I wasn't part of, glances I didn't understand. I felt like the guest in my own house. That night, after they left for a walk to clear their heads, I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by dirty dishes and cold turkey, and finally admitted what I'd been denying for months. My marriage wasn't dying by accident. It was being suffocated intentionally, silently, and beautifully. But the thing about silence is that it can't last forever. A few days later, I found something that shattered the last of my illusions. Christian's home office had always been locked. He kept the key on his watch chain, said it was where he stored confidential documents. But that morning, he'd rushed out early for a meeting, forgetting to lock the door. It was small, a simple oversight, but to me, it felt like fate holding the door open. Inside, the office smelled like leather and ink. His desk was meticulous, every paper stacked perfectly. But behind the desk, I saw the safe, heavy, black. The kind of thing that holds more than just valuables, it holds secrets. And that day it was slightly ajar. For a long time, I just stared at it. Every voice in my head screamed, "Don't," but the louder one whispered, "You already know something's wrong." I opened it. Inside Christian's safe, everything was arranged with precision: property deeds, insurance policies, investment portfolios, a neat little archive of a man who never left anything to chance. But between those perfect stacks was one out-of-place envelope, the cheap manila kind you'd find at a doctor's office. My pulse stuttered. The logo on the corner read Metropolitan Men's Health Center. The date stamped across the top. 3 years before we met. My first thought was that it had to be something mundane, a checkup, maybe a flu shot record. But my instincts, sharpened by months of silence and half-truths, told me this was different. I opened it, and with every line my world narrowed. Vasectomy consultation and procedure confirmation. Voluntary sterilization completed successfully. Patient counseled on permanence of procedure. The room tilted. My knees went weak, and for a moment I couldn't tell if the shaking was in my hands or the floor. I read the words again, slower this time, forcing them to make sense. 3 years before we met. 3 years before he bought the flowers, before he knelt with that ring, before every conversation about children where he'd nodded sympathetically, as if he shared my disappointment. My husband, the man who had just called me sterile in court, had surgically ensured he could never have children. Long before I entered the picture, the audacity was almost artistic. I took photos of every document, my hands trembling with a mix of fury and revelation. Then, carefully, I returned everything to its exact place. If Christian had built this marriage on deceit, I could play the long game too. That night at dinner, he was his usual polished self-calm, unreadable, immersed in his phone, while I served pasta neither of us would taste. He didn't notice anything. Not the way I watched him, not the way I smiled too calmly, not the tremor of truth sitting just behind my eyes. For the next few weeks, I became an actress in my own life. I laughed at his jokes, kissed his cheek, attended his events. He thought we were recovering. What we were really doing was approaching detonation. But there was one question that haunted me more than the vasectomy itself. Did Marcus know? Because Marcus wasn't just a business partner. He was practically a fixture in our home, our holidays, our conversations. They shared a history longer than our marriage, one built in college dorms and startup offices and late-night strategy calls. Whenever they were together, I ceased to exist. I used to think that was brotherhood. Now, I wasn't sure what it was. At Thanksgiving, I'd watched Christian glow around Marcus in ways he never glowed around me. Now, every moment between them replayed in my mind with a new filter, one that colored everything with betrayal. The way they stood too close when they talked, the quiet, knowing smiles, the way Christian's voice softened when he said Marcus's name. The pattern was too clear to ignore, so I decided to confirm it. Marcus was always polite with me, charming even, but there was a distance in his eyes, the kind that comes from shared secrets. I began to watch him too. When he came over for dinner, I studied the way Christian's entire body language changed, like someone had just flipped a switch. He laughed more easily, gestured more freely, even reached out to touch Marcus's arm as they spoke. I'd seen that same gesture once in our wedding photos, when he'd reached for me the same way. Once. During Christmas, I set the table for 3 and smiled through the holiday that no longer belonged to me. I watched Marcus pour Christian a drink, watched their fingers brush, watched the unspoken pass between them like oxygen. When Marcus complimented the turkey, Christian's pride was radiant, absurdly so, as if the compliment had been for him. Have you ever watched two people who are clearly in love try to hide it? It's almost painful. They stumble over their lies but never over each other. When they left that night, I sat by the dying fire, staring at the reflection of our wedding photo on the mantel. I wasn't angry yet. I was empty, the kind of emptiness that comes right before clarity. By the new year, I knew what I had to do. I found a name through a friend of Rachel's, a private investigator named Sarah Chen, known for her discretion and her precision. I met her in a small coffee shop in Queens, far from anywhere Christian or Marcus might appear. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, calm, and utterly unimpressed by drama. Most wives already know the answer before they hire me, she said. They just want proof that their instincts aren't lying. My instincts, I said quietly, have been screaming for years, she nodded. Then let's get you proof. The next 3 weeks were torture. Every morning, Christian left at the same time, his routine so exact it was practically ritual. Gym, office, lunch meeting, office again. But now I saw the spaces between those appointments differently. The 2-hour gym sessions, the client dinners that didn't match his calendar, the overnight business trips Marcus also happened to take. I kept my face calm, my tone steady, my role flawless. When Christian kissed me goodbye each morning, I smiled and kissed him back, even as bile rose in my throat. On the 21st day, Sarah called. "We need to meet," she said simply. "I have what you're looking for." We met in the same cafe, back corner, low light. She slid a thick envelope across the table. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "He's been seeing Marcus for years." The photos inside were undeniable. Christian and Marcus leaving a hotel in Midtown, not a business hotel, but the kind that charges by the hour for discretion. Another photo of them at a restaurant in the village, leaning close, hands intertwined across the table. And the last one, a kiss goodnight outside Marcus's apartment. Each photo was a new fracture in the illusion I'd built my life around. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "From what I can tell," Sarah said, "since college, maybe longer. Your husband didn't marry you to love you, Mrs. Morrison. He married you to hide." I stared at the photos until the faces blurred. The tears didn't come. They wouldn't, not yet. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. the kind that only arrives when grief becomes purpose. My marriage had been an elaborate cover story. My infertility was a fiction. My husband's love was a mask. But the part he hadn't calculated, the part that would cost him everything, was that I'd learned how to play his game better than he did. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the city glowing faintly beyond the windows, holding the photos like they were radioactive. Every image confirmed what I'd refused to see. Christian wasn't just unfaithful, he was methodical. My life had been his alibi. I was the perfect decoy, the trophy wife who made his story believable. By dawn, something inside me had hardened. No more denial, no more guessing. I wanted the truth documented, undeniable, and sharp enough to cut him where it hurt most, his reputation. I texted Sarah, "I'll need certified copies of everything." Her reply came within minutes. "Already working on it. You'll have the full package by tomorrow." When Christian came down for breakfast, he was all ease and control. "You're up early," he said, pouring coffee. "Couldn't sleep?" I met his eyes for the first time in months. "Just thinking about the future," I said. He smiled faintly, oblivious. "Good. You've been distant lately." Distant. The word almost made me laugh. I'd been invisible for years, and he was only now noticing. I spent that day in autopilot, moving through my routines like an actress in a play I'd already decided to end. Every detail of my plan unfolded in quiet motion. Copies of documents, bank statements, timestamps, everything organized neatly into a folder labeled house repairs, tucked into my purse. I didn't know when exactly I'd use it, but I knew the moment would come. That evening, while Christian was at the gym with Marcus, I opened a blank document on my laptop and typed 4 words. "I want a divorce." I stared at them for a long time, feeling my hands steady for the first time in months. Then I saved the file and closed it. He came home late, smelling of cologne and satisfaction. "Long day," he said. "Marcus and I were reviewing a new proposal." "I'm sure you were," I said softly. He didn't hear the steel in my tone. Over the next few days, I collected myself the way he collected assets, carefully, quietly, efficiently. I met with a lawyer recommended by Sarah's network, Jennifer Walsh, a woman who specialized in high-net-worth divorces and enjoyed taking down men who thought they were untouchable. She listened as I laid out the story. When I finished, she tapped the folder of evidence and said, "This isn't just adultery, Mrs. Morrison, it's fraud. He married you under false pretenses. You'll win." I nodded, but winning wasn't what I wanted. Not yet. What I wanted was for him to see the look on my face when his empire began to crumble. 2 nights later, I found Christian in his office, sleeves rolled up, reviewing quarterly reports. It was almost poetic, him buried in numbers, me holding the truth that would bankrupt him morally, legally, and publicly. "I want a divorce," I said. He didn't look up right away. "Don't be dramatic, Summer. Whatever's bothering you, we can talk about it. There's nothing to talk about." My voice was calm. "I've already filed." That made him look up. I watched the calculation flicker across his face, the shift from annoyance to control, from disbelief to strategy. "Let's not do anything hasty," he said, standing. "Marriage takes work. You're emotional right now. You'll regret." "I know about Marcus." He froze. For the first time since I'd known him, Christian Morrison didn't have a script. I kept my eyes on him. "I know about the hotel, the restaurant, the apartment, and the vasectomy you had 3 years before we met." The color drained from his face. "I don't know what you think." "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't insult me any more than you already have." He tried to recover, straightening his jacket, forcing a smile. "Even if that were true, it doesn't change our agreement. You signed the prenup. You'll walk away with nothing." I took a slow breath. That might have been true if the marriage wasn't built on fraud. For a split second, fear flashed in his eyes. Then arrogance returned. "You're bluffing." I smiled faintly. "You'll find out soon enough. I suggest you call your lawyer." The next morning, his team of attorneys filed a counterclaim that painted me as unstable, manipulative, emotionally erratic, the kind of woman tabloids love to dissect. They didn't realize I'd already built my case. The preliminary hearing was set for a Tuesday. Christian arrived with Marcus, their suits matching, their confidence unshaken. I sat quietly beside Jennifer, the same manila envelope resting on my lap, the same one I'd found in his safe months earlier. Christian's lawyer began with the performance of his career. My client entered this marriage in good faith, he said, his tone grave, believing he and Mrs. Morrison would start a family. When it became clear she could not fulfill that essential condition, the marriage deteriorated beyond repair. The judge nodded. The gallery murmured. I could feel eyes on me, curious, pitying, judging. Christian's lawyer continued. Furthermore, we have medical documentation proving Mrs. Morrison is infertile. That was his fatal mistake. I stood before Jennifer could stop me. Your Honor, I said clearly, I have evidence that directly contradicts that claim. The courtroom went silent as I stepped forward and placed the manila envelope on the judge's desk. Inside was everything: vasectomy records, bank statements, Sarah's photos, every lie documented and certified. The judge flipped through the pages, his expression changing from curiosity to shock to disgust. He looked at Christian, then at Marcus. Mr. Morrison, he said, would you care to explain these documents? Christian's lawyer jumped up, stammering about procedure and relevance, but the damage was already done. As I sat back down, Christian's eyes met mine across the room. For the first time, he saw me not as decoration, not as cover, but as a threat. And I smiled. Because he had spent years making me feel small. And now, in front of the same world that used to admire him, I was about to show them exactly who he really was. The air inside that courtroom could have sliced glass. Cameras weren't allowed, but that didn't stop reporters from filling the benches, pretending to be observers. Christian's name carried weight in Manhattan's financial circles, and the scent of scandal travels faster than perfume. I sat still, back straight, the manila envelope already resting on the judge's desk. Everything after that moved like a movie in slow motion. Every breath, every word, every flicker of expression. Christian's lawyer launched into his performance, smooth as always. Your Honor, my client has suffered greatly in this marriage. He married with the understanding that children would be part of their life together. Sadly, Mrs. Prowlis Morrison concealed her infertility until it was too late. His voice carried the practiced rhythm of pity. He even looked at me with mock compassion. Mr. Morrison has endured emotional hardship no husband should bear. I didn't blink. I could see the judge's sympathy shifting toward Christian. It was the same look I'd seen at dinner parties, the same reaction powerful men earned by default. Christian looked the part, perfectly polished, wounded, righteous. Then came the moment he destroyed himself. Furthermore, his lawyer continued, we have medical proof that Mrs. Morrison is unable to conceive. He smiled as if he'd just delivered a killing blow. Silence. The kind of silence that feels alive. The judge leaned forward. Is that so? He asked, voice measured. Yes, Your Honor, the lawyer said proudly. Documents can be presented upon request. I stood. Your Honor, I said, calm and clear, I have medical proof as well, though it concerns a different patient. The lawyer turned to me, startled. Mrs. Morrison, this is highly irregular. So is perjury, I said. The judge gestured. Proceed. I stepped closer, heels echoing across the marble. 3 years before our marriage, Mr. Morrison underwent a vasectomy at the Metropolitan Men's Health Center, voluntary sterilization, permanent. A ripple of sound rolled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled, the gallery whispered, and for the first time, Christian's composure cracked. That's ridiculous, he said, voice tight. The judge opened the envelope, pulling out the documents one by one. The signed consent forms, the physician's report, the insurance billing records. He read silently, his expression darkening with each page. Then he lifted the photographs Christian and Marcus leaving the hotel, hands clasped, the restaurant table in the village, the kiss goodnight outside Marcus's apartment. Gasps rippled through the room. Mr. Morrison, the judge said sharply, would you like to explain these? Christian's lawyer stammered. Your Honor, these are private, unrelated. Unrelated to what? The judge interrupted. Your client's credibility? His testimony under oath? His deliberate attempt to defraud both this court and his spouse? Christian's face had gone pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. My relationship with Mr. Delqua is professional, he said stiffly. The judge's tone turned cold. Professional relationships do not typically involve hotel stays and midnight affection. He turned to me. Mrs. Morrison, your evidence is thorough. The court will accept it into record. Jennifer, my lawyer, rose beside me. Your Honor, these documents demonstrate not only adultery but premeditated fraud. My client was deceived from the moment of engagement. The prenup itself is void." The judge nodded slowly. "Indeed." The courtroom buzzed. Christian's attorney tried to regain control, citing irrelevance and privacy rights, but the damage was irreversible. The judge's voice cut through the noise. "This court finds that Mr. Morrison deliberately entered into marriage under false pretenses, concealing his sterilization and misrepresenting his intent to have children. Furthermore, the evidence of infidelity constitutes moral and legal grounds for fault-based divorce. The prenuptial agreement is hereby nullified." You could almost hear Christian's empire splinter. The man who spent years controlling every narrative had just lost control of his own. The judge continued, his voice like a hammer striking glass. "Mrs. Morrison is awarded 50% of all marital assets, including the primary residence, vacation properties, and her proportional share of Morrison Investment Group." Christian's lawyer's mouth fell open. Christian stood up, face flushed. "That's absurd. That company is my life's work, built during your marriage," the judge replied coolly. "Shared property under the law. You should have considered that before lying to your wife in this court." The reporters were scribbling furiously now. I could already imagine the headlines. "Millionaire mogul's secret life exposed. Fraudulent marriage ends in scandal. Betrayal, lies, and a vasectomy." Across the aisle, Marcus sat frozen, eyes downcast, as if he could hide from the truth now printed on the judge's desk. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man who'd stolen my husband, but the one who'd built the lie with him. He wouldn't meet my gaze. When the gavel struck, the sound was sharp enough to feel final. The hearing was over. Christian was still standing, but everything that made him powerful was gone. I didn't smile. Not yet. Not until I reached the courthouse steps and felt the wind on my face. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like air, it felt like freedom. News of the verdict spread through Manhattan like fire in a dry field. By the next morning, Christian's name was everywhere: financial blogs, gossip columns, even morning television. The man who had once been described as a visionary in tailored suits was now the headline of a modern tragedy. Investment mogul exposed for marriage fraud. Vasectomy scandal destroys Morrison empire. His picture, once a symbol of success, was now an emblem of deceit. The financial world turned cold fast. Clients withdrew their investments. Partners called in lawyers. Journalists dug into everything: his company's contracts, his personal life, his social media. Morrison Investment Group became radioactive overnight. Christian tried to issue a statement about personal matters being misrepresented, but nobody cared. The more he spoke, the more guilty he sounded. In an industry built on trust, he had none left. Marcus vanished first. Within 48 hours of the ruling, his name was quietly removed from the company website. He stopped answering calls, stopped showing up to the office. Rumors spread that he'd fled to California to start fresh. Christian was left standing in the ruins of their empire, a man surrounded by silence and unpaid bills. Meanwhile, my lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, moved fast. Within a week, she finalized the transfer of assets. The penthouse became mine. The Hamptons house, the vehicles, the stocks all split right down the middle. I didn't even have to lift a pen. Christian's arrogance had done the work for me. When he came to collect his things from the penthouse, I was there, sitting on the couch he'd once chosen for its executive energy. He looked older, somehow smaller. The perfect posture was gone. He glanced around like a man visiting a museum of his own mistakes. "This isn't over," he said finally, stacking a few boxes. "You think you've won something, but you don't know what you're doing. That company will collapse without me." I stayed calm. "You said the same thing about our marriage." His jaw clenched. "You don't have the skill, the network, or the knowledge to run a business like that. You'll lose it all within a year." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I won't lose myself doing it." He stared at me, trying to find the old Summer, the one who apologized when he raised his voice, who waited up for him, who smiled through neglect. She wasn't there anymore. When the door closed behind him, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was clean. I walked through the penthouse, room by room, seeing it for the first time not as a cage but as proof of survival. Every expensive piece of art, every chair, every glass surface, it had all been part of the lie. Now, it was mine. The first thing I did was call a moving company. Every piece of furniture Christian had chosen went into storage. I replaced his modern minimalism with color, warmth, and life. Then I donated his entire art collection, the same one he'd bragged about, to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Let them handle his legacy. Jennifer suggested I could sell my shares in the company and walk away with more than enough money to start over anywhere. But the thought of running from what he'd built made me feel sick. No, I said. I'm not cashing out. I'm taking control. Rebuilding Morrison Investment Group was like operating on a patient in cardiac arrest. The brand was toxic, employees uncertain, clients fleeing, but under the rot, the structure was solid. I renamed it Meridian Capital Partners, a clean slate, a name that meant direction and renewal. Then I brought in Rebecca Torres, a financial strategist known for rescuing companies other people had given up on. When we met, Rebecca asked, "Why me? You could hire someone safer, someone less expensive, because Christian never would have hired you," I said. "You're everything he underestimated." She smiled. "Then let's prove him wrong." The first 6 months were brutal. We lost nearly 40% of our client base and laid off a third of the staff. Headlines predicted our collapse by the end of the quarter, but slowly things shifted. New clients came not in spite of the scandal, but because of it. They liked our story, a company reborn from betrayal, a woman turning deceit into discipline. We marketed transparency, accountability, and authenticity, the very things Christian never valued. Marcus called once, about 8 months after the divorce. It was late. The office was dark except for my desk lamp. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "I never meant for you to get hurt." "But you knew I would," I replied evenly. "You knew everything about the vasectomy, about the prenup, about the plan. You could have stopped it." "I love him," Marcus said simply. "I always have. I didn't shout. I didn't even raise my voice." "Then you should have loved him enough not to help him destroy someone else." He was quiet for a long time. "He underestimated you," he said finally. "We both did." "I know," I said, and hung up. By the end of that year, Meridian Capital Partners was thriving. The scandal had faded, replaced by admiration. Investors called us the comeback story of the decade. Rebecca was featured on the cover of Financial Weekly with the headline, "The Women Who Turned Betrayal into Business." As for Christian, word spread that he'd moved out of Manhattan. He was consulting part-time for smaller firms now, no longer the king of the room. His name still carried recognition but not respect. When I thought about him, it wasn't with hatred anymore. It was with clarity. Some people build empires on lies because they can't survive the truth. He was one of them. And me? I was finally learning how to build something real. 2 years after the divorce, Meridian Capital Partners wasn't just surviving, it was roaring back to life. We had opened offices in Chicago and Los Angeles, rebuilt our reputation client by client, and grown our portfolio by more than 300%. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company Christian created to mask deceit was now thriving on the very thing he could never offer: honesty. My mornings no longer began with dread. I woke up before dawn, brewed my own coffee instead of waiting for silence beside someone else's, and looked out at the skyline that used to make me feel small. It didn't anymore. Success didn't taste like champagne galas or luxury penthouses. It tasted like peace, consistency, and control. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't performing for anyone. Then one morning my assistant buzzed the intercom. "Miss Morrison, there's someone here to see you, a Mr. David Chen from Chen and Associates." I frowned. "Did he say what it's about?" "He says it's a business proposition you'll find interesting." David Chen, the name clicked. Sarah's brother. The same Sarah Chen who had helped me expose Christian. I told my assistant to send him in. David was a mirror of his sister, sharp, composed, quietly confident. He sat across from me and placed a folder on my desk. "I think you'll want to see this," he said. Inside was a company prospectus. Morrison Investment Group. My breath caught. "They're selling?" I asked. He nodded. "Bleeding money. No one wants to touch it. Scandal's too deep, and Christian's reputation still scares investors. But on paper, the assets are worth a fortune." I flipped through the figures. The valuation was barely a fraction of what it used to be. I could buy it outright without breaking stride. "Does Christian know who's buying?" David smiled. "Not yet. The purchase offer went through one of our shell companies. As far as he knows, it's just another firm trying to acquire a distressed asset." For a moment, I didn't move. My fingers brushed over the Morrison logo on the page, the same one I'd once seen on letterheads, invitations, and contracts during our marriage. The same one that had defined my prison, and now it was being handed back to me, powerless and hollow. "How soon can we close?" I asked. "Within 2 weeks." "Do it." The acquisition went through quietly, almost too smoothly. When the paperwork was finalized, Morrison Investment Group officially became a subsidiary of Meridian Capital Partners. It was poetic, the ghost of my past folded into the foundation of my present. The news reached Christian before the ink was dry. He called that same evening. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Summer," he said, his voice flatter than I remembered. "I just found out who bought the company." "Congratulations on the sale," I replied evenly. "I hear you got a fair price considering the circumstances." "Why?" The question came out raw, unguarded. "You've already taken everything from me. Why this too?" "I didn't take anything," I said. "I just stopped letting you take from me." He exhaled sharply. "You don't understand what that company meant to me." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "It was your identity, your proof of worth, your legacy, the same way you tried to make our marriage mine. The difference is that you built yours on lies. I'm rebuilding yours with truth." He was silent for a long time. "What are you going to do with it? Turn it into something that doesn't require deceit to succeed." He let out a hollow laugh. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said quietly. "Just freer." When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the city lights reflected in the glass wall. I thought I'd feel triumph, but what I felt was closure. Not the cinematic kind, but the kind that makes you exhale for the first time in years. Integrating Morrison Investment Group into Meridian took 6 months of meticulous work. We kept the best employees and discarded the ones who'd helped Christian cover his tracks. We merged client portfolios, streamlined operations, and erased the last remnants of his empire. By the end of the fiscal year, the old name no longer existed. On paper, it was gone. In reality, it was reborn under my hand. But in the process, I uncovered something unexpected. Christian's finances were worse than anyone knew. He'd leveraged nearly everything during the final years of the company, desperate to keep his image intact. The man who once flaunted private jets and penthouses was now barely holding on to a mid-level analyst position at a small consulting firm. Marcus, I later learned, had moved with him to Portland, running a modest investment advisory. They were finally living openly but quietly, almost invisibly. I didn't hate them. I didn't wish them ill. In some strange way, I was grateful, because without their lies, I might never have found the truth of who I was. When Meridian's annual report published that winter, a journalist wrote, "Summer Morrison turned betrayal into blueprint. She didn't just win, she transformed." I kept that line. It wasn't about revenge. It was about evolution. And yet, life still had one last surprise for me, one that no headline could have predicted. It happened on an evening that felt deceptively ordinary. A charity gala, one of those glittering Manhattan events I'd attended dozens of times before, back when I was just someone's wife, smiling for cameras that didn't see me. This time, I was there as the keynote sponsor. Meridian Capital Partners was on the invitation banner, and my name was on the guest list, not as Mrs. Morrison, but simply as Summer. The ballroom buzzed with conversations that smelled like perfume and ambition. I had learned to navigate these rooms, to read every handshake, every half-smile, every compliment disguised as curiosity. And yet, that night, someone caught me off guard. Dr. James Mitchell, the host introduced, Mount Sinai's pediatric trauma unit. He wasn't like the others, no designer arrogance, no rehearsed charm. His tux was simple, his smile genuine. "You're the woman who rebuilt Meridian," he said, offering his hand. "Or should I say, the woman who burned down an empire and planted a better one." I laughed. "Depends on who you ask. Some would say I just got lucky." "Luck doesn't build companies," he replied. "Resilience does." We talked for hours long after the speeches ended, long after the waiters cleared the tables. It wasn't flirting, it was conversation, the kind I hadn't had in years. We talked about his work 12-hour shifts, emergency surgeries, children whose lives he fought to save. He told me about his divorce, about how success doesn't keep you warm when you come home to silence. I told him about rebuilding trust, about how power can feel hollow if it isn't rooted in purpose. When the night ended, he asked if I'd like to have dinner sometime. Somewhere quiet, he said, without 100 people pretending not to eavesdrop. I almost said no. After Christian, love felt like a foreign language. I no longer trusted myself to speak. But something about James, his steadiness, his quiet, made me say yes. Dinner led to more dinners. Conversations turned into mornings that didn't feel heavy. He never tried to impress me. He just showed up consistently, calmly, honestly. When he learned about my past, he didn't flinch. He said, "You're the strongest person I've ever met." I laughed and told him strength wasn't the goal, survival was. He disagreed. Survival is what you do when you're trapped. Strength is what you build after you get out. 6 months later, I stood in my bathroom holding a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines. For a long moment, I couldn't move. After being called barren, broken, sterile, my body had chosen this moment to tell a different story. I walked out of the bathroom still holding the test, my hands shaking. James looked up from the couch, reading my face instantly. "Everything okay?" I showed him. "I'm pregnant." He stared for a second, stunned. Then he crossed the room and pulled me close, careful, gentle. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," I admitted. "Excited. Vindicated. Like the universe has a sense of humor." He smiled. "Then we'll laugh together." 9 months later, on a snowy Tuesday morning in February, our daughter, Emma Rose Mitchell, was born 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and her father's calm eyes. As I held her, tiny and perfect, I understood something I hadn't before. Revenge fades, but creation endures. James proposed 6 months after Emma was born, not with a diamond meant to dazzle a crowd, but with a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. "I don't want to outshine you," he said. "I just want to stand beside you." We married in the garden of the penthouse, the same one that once felt like a gilded prison. There were no photographers, no Forbes guests, no gossip blogs, just a handful of friends, family, and sunlight filtering through ivy. As for Christian and Marcus, they weren't invited, of course, but I'd heard they'd settled quietly in Portland running a small advisory firm, living openly now. Their names still carried whispers, but no power. They had become ordinary men, stripped of the myth they once wore like armor. Sometimes, when I rock Emma to sleep, I think about how everything began: the courtroom, the humiliation, the lies. And then I look at her tiny fingers, her steady breathing, and I realize that my story stopped being about betrayal a long time ago. It became about rebirth. People still ask me if I regret marrying Christian. I don't. Every scar he left became a map, one that led me here. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to rebuild after someone tried to break you, remember this. Sometimes the people who betray you don't ruin your life. They redirect it. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. Years later, when I think of Christian, I don't see the courtroom or the betrayal anymore. I see what came after the rebuilding, the peace, the strange kind of gratitude that only grows in the cracks of something once shattered. Pain turned into purpose. Humiliation became history. What he destroyed forced me to rebuild, and what I rebuilt became more real than anything we ever had together. Meridian Capital Partners continued to grow, becoming one of the most trusted mid-tier investment firms on the East Coast. Not because we were perfect, but because we were transparent. That word, transparent, became our guiding principle, our moral compass. It was everything Christian's world had lacked. And the irony was almost beautiful. The company born from lies became a temple of truth. Reporters occasionally tried to resurrect the scandal. "Do you ever think of your ex-husband?" one asked during an interview. I smiled. "Only when I need to remind myself how far honesty can carry you once you stop lying to yourself." The line went viral, of course. People love redemption stories almost as much as they love scandals. But I hadn't said it for effect. I'd said it because it was true. Christian and Marcus eventually faded from public memory. I heard through industry whispers that Marcus's small firm in Portland was doing modestly well, while Christian had taken a consulting position that barely resembled his old empire. For years, he had treated people like chess pieces, efficient, replaceable. The world had simply stopped playing his game. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate, I'd learned, is just another form of attachment, a way of letting someone occupy space in your mind long after they're gone. I'd traded that space for something better: purpose, family, and peace. My life now revolved around small, steady things: breakfasts with James before his hospital shifts, watching Emma chase sunlight across the living room floor, mentoring young women entering finance who'd been told they were too emotional or too fragile for leadership. I told them, they called me emotional too. Turns out emotion is just energy with direction. Sometimes when I walk into Meridian's headquarters, I stop at the brass plaque near the entrance, founded on integrity, rebuilt on truth. It wasn't just branding, it was a reminder of what it cost to get here. The woman I used to be, polite, agreeable, eager to please, had died in that courtroom. What replaced her was someone I actually liked. People often ask about revenge, expecting satisfaction. But revenge isn't a flame that burns forever. It's a match that lights the way out. After that, you either move toward the light or you stay staring at the fire. I chose the light. Every once in a while, I get letters from women strangers who watched my story unfold through the media. They tell me they left marriages built on manipulation, jobs that stifled them, lives that no longer fit. They say, "You made me believe starting over isn't failure." Those messages mean more than any settlement, any company, any profit sheet. Because if my story proves anything, it's that survival isn't the end of a battle, it's the beginning of a legacy. On Emma's 5th birthday, as she laughed under a sky full of balloons, I caught myself thinking of that courtroom again, of the moment Christian called me sterile in front of the world. I remember how it felt then: the humiliation, the disbelief, the fire in my chest that nearly choked me. And now, watching my daughter run barefoot through our garden, I realize something simple and profound: the truth doesn't need revenge, it just needs time. I don't know where Christian is now. Maybe he's happy. Maybe he still blames me. Maybe he finally found peace. But it doesn't matter anymore. His story stopped defining mine a long time ago. Because every time I tuck Emma in at night, every time James kisses my forehead and whispers, "We're lucky," I think. No, not lucky, reborn. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever been made to feel small, or broken, or worthless, I want you to remember this: you are not the failure someone else built for you. You are the foundation of something they could never understand: resilience. And that is what victory really looks like.